Welcome, everybody. I want to talk about a subject that is simple. It doesn't really require a whole lot of thought, that a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into it, because it's pretty much something that you come across every day. But in my opinion, it's becoming slowly but surely a national security threat, and that is lying. So people lying. Lying is a snowflake. It starts out really small, and then over time it builds up enough steam where it can get people killed, get your society overthrown, all because people decided to lie. More importantly, I want to discuss the lack of accountability for catching people in the middle of lies. And catching people in the middle of lies also means refusing to look into something because you want to believe that it's true, even though there is no evidence that it is true. Now, let's start at the very beginning. In this country, in the United States, and in many countries, we have perjury laws, meaning that when you are a witness in a trial, you swear on the Bible and say that you're going to tell the truth. If you go up there and you lie, it's supposed to be illegal. We should be arresting people who lie to the public after swearing in public. And yet we don't. On countless occasions, people have stood in front of the world, lied, and continued to walk around. And in some cases, they've become multimillionaires after they lied. Lying is so bad, in fact, that the Christian God even put it in the Bible. Do not bear false witness. That means you cannot lie. And as far as I'm concerned, Christianity is the only religion where you can't lie to anyone. You can't lie to fellow Christians. You're not allowed to lie to Muslims. You're not allowed to lie to Jews. You're not allowed to lie to anyone. Thou shalt not bear false witness. You're not allowed to lie. Now, there have been stories about how Muslims are okay with people lying to other non-Muslims, and Jews can lie to non-Jews. I'm not going to sit here and debate that. I don't know that much about those religions. But I can say, if you're a Christian, you are required to tell the truth. Now, there's three kinds of written and oral communications. Now, we know most communication is nonverbal, but of written and oral communications, there's three types that are the most important that we're going to be discussing. One is general information. General information is honest and it is accurate. If I tell you that it is raining outside and you look outside and you see that it's raining, I gave you something that was honest and I gave you something that was accurate. The second is misinformation. Misinformation is honest, but it's inaccurate, which means it could be an accident. If I say, yeah, it's going to rain today, and you take an umbrella and then it doesn't rain, well, honestly, I thought it was going to rain and it didn't. I mean, I didn't lie to you. The third thing is disinformation. Disinformation is both dishonest and inaccurate. If I know it's going to rain and I tell you it ain't going to rain today, you're going to be fine, and you go out there and it thunderstorms and you get wet, and then I kind of sit back and laugh at you, I did that on purpose, right? That's a war tactic. Giving you false information is a war tactic. And most people don't think about it from that perspective, but ultimately that's what it is. This means that when you knowingly give people false information, you're engaging in war, okay? It's an information war, but it's war. And we learn, just from generally following the news and reading, that the information war is the beginning of any sort of physical war. But what this means is that the act of propaganda is engaging in information war, correct? Now, Noam Chomsky, he wrote a book called Media Control. It's about 100 pages. It's very small. And in it, he talks about the idea of manufacturing consent, which is bringing about consensus in the public, usually by utilizing propaganda. The way he explains it is that there's two separate kinds of people. There's the specialized class, which are the individuals who analyze and execute and make the decisions. And then there's the bewildered herd, the individuals who are basically spectators, and it's their job to lend their weight behind the specialized class. The best way to think about this is think about it like an election. The specialized class will be the politician. They will go and stand in front of everybody, and they would tell you, this is the problem, this is how we're going to fix it, yada yada yada. You, the bewildered herd, are listening, and then it's your job to have some level of discernment and to throw your weight behind that politician in the hopes that that politician is correct about, one, what the problem is, and two, how he's going to fix it. Now, Noam Chomsky is a well-known socialist. Well, he's pretty much a communist. But in his view, manufacturing consent means to divide various institutions like the media, schools, and pop culture by instilling in them beliefs which will serve private power. You can underline the word private. Again, ironically, he wrote the book about, well, he's writing a book about propaganda. That is, of course, propaganda. But my favorite piece about the book is that he talks about symbolism, which is intentionally vague slogans that are pretty much empty, the point of which is to manufacture consent. Means that these are things that are created, and the whole point of it is for you, the bewildered herd, to get behind somebody, usually, again, a politician or some kind of advocate, and they're telling you this is a problem, and then you join up with them. Give you some really good examples. One, obviously, number one with a bullet, Black Lives Matter, right? Everybody knows Black Lives Matter. You've heard it 100 times. It was on billboards. It was written in the streets. Everybody knows what Black Lives Matter. The question of Black Lives Matter, however, is very vague. Because if you say, what about abortion? They'll say, we're not talking about abortion. If you say, what about gang violence? They'll say, we're not talking about gang violence. So what Black Lives, what are you talking about? Well, you're talking specifically about police brutality. Specifically. So the people who galvanized around the concept of Black Lives Matter, they didn't realize, at least early, during the galvanizing, that it wasn't about all Black lives. It was about specifically these groups of people that they decided are important in the black community, which usually are criminals and people who are having issues with the police. Another really good example is Believe All Women. So Believe All Women, I don't remember when it was spawned, but it was basically a response to the Me Too movement, which is also an empty slogan. We'll talk about that in a second. But it was the idea that if a woman makes an accusation, she doesn't need to provide any evidence. Merely she saying that it occurred is evidence, and you should believe it. Of course, even when these people are revealed to be liars later on, even when these stories end up not being anywhere in the realm of reality, or even when certain women say that these things are not true, Believe All Women. Another one, this kind of ties into the Black Lives Matter, was Hands Up, Don't Shoot, which is, an easy symbol of the hands being in the air. Came from, I believe, the Michael Brown shooting. You believe that police are gunning down black males who are surrendering in the streets. And it did get a lot of emotional attachment to it. Of course, this ended up not being true. Another really good one is America First. This is one that is floating around a lot now, because what does America First actually mean? For some people, it's very literal, where we have a very strong immigration defense, which includes legal immigration, the H-1Bs and things of that nature. But for other people, America First may mean, that we do things that benefit the entire country, more so than a small number of people. A really good example of this would be like the tariffs. Tariffs are really good for certain class of American citizens, but they're not very good for another class of American citizens, meaning that those people who wish to let's say, buy goods and services now have to pay more for those goods and services because of the tariffs. So while some providers are going to benefit from the tariffs because now products coming from outside the country mean more, the people who are already in the country, well, their products are going to cost more. So it costs more to build a house. It costs more to build cars. It costs more if you need to do steel or lumber that might be, or rubber that might come from outside the country. Is that really America first, that you're jacking up costs on the American citizens? Or is it America first that we put our companies and our industries and our labor first? Obviously, tied into America First is MAGA, Make America Great Again. A lot of people who critique MAGA say, when was America ever great? But the people who shout MAGA talk about the Industrial Revolution. They talk about, the big boom of World War II when we had, large numbers of people in the workforce and you could buy and survive off of one income. They talk about maybe the 80s where it was a time of excess and, before you got canceled for, certain small grievances, people lived their lives much better. And in their minds, they may say, well, things were better 40 years ago or 60 years ago or even 100 years ago. While other people would say, well, America was never great, or it was never great for blacks, or it was never great for immigrants, or it was never great for Jews, or whatever the case may be. And then obviously the Me Too movement, which ties into the believe all women element, but Me Too was just another way of women going online and telling stories in order to oust, at least you're supposed to believe, predators and other individuals in society. Now, obviously, some of this stuff ended up being an exaggeration. You get guys who were just bad on a date who got Me Too'd, and that's nowhere near rape, which is what Me Too was all about, was sexual assault. And then it just comes that you were a bad boyfriend, you were mean to her over the phone, you were a jerk, you didn't call her back, you ghosted her, you wouldn't give her any money. All this sort of stuff became Me Too worthy. But all of this, it ties into the information war, because as Noam Chomsky explains, what it does is it creates what's called he calls a parade of enemies, which is they use fear to manufacture consent. Now, when you're talking about Noam Chomsky in the time he wrote that book, he was talking about the Bush administration and using fear of Muslims following 9/11 to galvanize the country and pass something like the Patriot Act. But you saw a lot of this using the same things that I mentioned earlier about bail reform laws that came after Hands Up, Don't Shoot and Black Lives Matter. You had a lot of criminal justice reforms come into American society after, Black Lives Matter and Hands Up, Don't Shoot. You saw the redefinition of things like rape. You saw an expansion of terms like sexual harassment, which was already slowly but surely expanding because of Me Too and Believe All Women. Pretty much everything became sexual harassment. In the wake of MAGA and America First, certain situations are seen as an attack on American society. So if you are a free marketer and you believe in global free markets, then you're a globalist. You're trying to run the country with H-1Bs and destroy our labor force. You're not for the American worker. You're, Israel first or China first or whatever. If you oppose the tariffs, or if you oppose the way ICE behaves, then you're a hater of the country. It becomes this galvanizing force that each one of these empty slogans, they create an us versus them. And once you do that, obviously, it becomes permissible to engage an information war against the other side. The final bit of Noam Chomsky's book is about what he calls selective perception, which is manufacturing consent through usually omitting information and kind of pushing questioning to the back. So selective perception is a really good one, would be in the civil rights movement, where Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they would engage in provocative things like sit-ins or, marches or whatever, the intention of which is to cause a problem. The intention of which is to draw police, so that they can be recorded and you can see people being hit with bottles and having fire hoses turned on them, where this wouldn't have happened if they had not behaved in such a way. And you see it currently also with a lot of the stuff going on around ICE facilities and things like this going on around, immigration or Antifa, where there's a whole lot of selective information. The Kyle Rittenhouse situation was one of the really good ones. Daniel Penny was another one where a lot of information is omitted because there's certain people in the media or there's certain parts of society that want to push a certain agenda. So things are obscured. Now, for the Daniel Penny situation, you're led to believe that he was some crazy racist who choked to death a Michael Jackson impersonator on a New York City subway. And when you actually see the video, however, you see that there were black people helping him and that it wasn't really race related at all. If you continue to look at the information, you see that there were black women who were scared on that subway, and he was trying to help. And obviously the media decided they were going to destroy his life, so they selectively omitted all of the stuff about him helping black people and black people helping him to lead you to believe that he was a crazy racist that was out there trying to kill people. Again, this is the information war. This is lying by omission. You're still bearing false witness, even if you say, well, we don't need to tell that part of the story. Because that dictates how people would react to the story. A lie by omission is still a war tactic, because a lie by omission still means I know more and I'm just not going to tell you, which is the exact same thing as giving you false information. The truth is this, that we're all human beings. We all have our biases, our prejudices, our vices. We all engage in sin, and to some degree, we all even lie. These are unique human traits, and they exist in all of us. The purpose of telling the truth should be that we could create a fuller view of history and of each individual case so that we can make informed decisions. When you're talking about politics or policy, what do you support and who do you support and why do you support them? When it comes, just to double back to what Noam Chomsky said, I don't disagree that there's a specialized class of individuals in our society. We know that we live in a republic. We vote for representatives, whether it's the House, the Senate, there's judges, there's attorney generals, all of these people that we vote for who stood in front of us and said that they were going to fix problem X or they were going to do X. And it's their job. We leave power in the hands of these individuals because we don't have the power to affect large scale change, but our representatives do. And what we want to hear from these representatives, whether they be judges or the president or the mayor or whatever, is what problems have you identified and what solutions have you married with these problems? So when they lie, and a lot of these people, especially elected officials, they again put their hands on a Bible or a Quran or whatever, and they swear. When they do that and then they turn around and lie, there should be a level of accountability for that. And part of the reason why our country and many countries around the world are in such basket case situations is because there is no accountability for people who lie. And what happens when there's no accountability for people who lie? Well, what ends up happening is you start seeing a lot of demoralization. Some people even feel humiliated. And that creates a very unique situation, because if you look at just like about a history of people getting away with large scale lies that destroy people's lives, I'm not talking about politicians now, I'm talking about regular individuals. 1987, Tawana Brawley claimed she was raped. It destroyed the lives of several young men. She got sued and they won money, but she never paid them. There was no accountability for Tawana Brawley lying. There was no accountability on the media for spreading her lies over television or through the radio. There was no accountability on, I believe it was Al Sharpton that was on TV with her. There was no accountability for that. In 2012, it was Emma Sokowitz, the mattress girl, who I believe was it Rolling Stone magazine? and she lied about being raped. Again, she became more famous after she lied than anything. Nothing happened. The Kavanaugh accuser, what's her name? Christine Blasey Ford in 2018. The Trump liar, E. Jean Carroll in 2023. The Duke Lacrosse case with Crystal Magnum. This was in 2006. All of these situations did irreparable damage to gender relations in the United States because it led young men to thinking that they lived in a rape culture. That there was hundreds of rapes going on all the time, and you young men, you need to do something about your rape culture. So now we have to destroy your fraternities and put girls in the fraternities, and we have to, we can't allow the boys to be alone too much. It casts all this suspicion on these young men, and it creates a problem. Now you're surprised now that there is online misogynists and incels and all these sorts of people who are online who hate women. Well, you allowed all of these women to lie in public. Some of them even lied to Congress. Some lied under oath. And nothing happened. In fact, most of them got made famous or became rich after the fact. And then you're told we can't prosecute fake rape accusations because then it might put off people who really were raped. So that means we can't offer any accountability to the women who lie. And it's not just gender relations. Look at all the race relations. There's a slew of fake hate crimes. Tons of fake hate crimes. LeBron James, the graffiti on the door or whatever. This was in 2017. There was obviously the Jussie Smollett situation in 2019. The Bubba Wallace NASCAR noose issue that took place in 2020 that brought the FBI into the story. And it was on the news. It was everywhere. People believe that somebody put a noose in this man's garage. The hands up, don't shoot fiasco with Michael Brown. Again and again and again, these fake hate crimes, these fake racial crimes, these fake issues, it embitters people. You have an entire generation of folks who have been taught through their schooling, through the media, that poor blacks are constantly under race threats, that they're constantly being attacked. Look at what happened to Jussie Smollett. He was attacked just for being black. Look at what happened to LeBron James. You're never too safe, even if you're LeBron James. You have Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama, each one coming out talking about how they were looked at funny in the grocery store, or how somebody mistreated them because they were black. And you got all these white people, both male and female, but they're specifically concerned with white boys who are upset about this system and about this society. Well, you've been telling them their whole lives that the black people are being terrorized by whites. And every time you do even a little bit of digging, you find out some of these things are straight up fucking lies. So what you're doing is you're engaging in an information war against them. That's what this is. You want to know what created Nick Fuentes? You want to know how you got Andrew Tate? 40 years of lying, of information war. That's how you get Nick Fuentes. That's how you get Andrew Tate. When young people see that you can lie in public and nothing will happen, then they become demoralized. They stop believing in the system. And when they stop believing in the system, they start believing in something else. And what they choose to believe in, you have no control over. But it's not just race relations and gender relations too. 1998 was a linchpin for the Matthew Shepard case, the young gay male who was killed in Wyoming. For years, everybody was told that Matthew Shepard was killed because he was gay. It was a prime example of homophobia in America being lethal. Again and again, you heard this. Turns out just a few years later, it was revealed that Matthew Shepard was not killed for being gay. He was killed in a drug deal. Did anybody get held accountable for the lies Decades of lying. They built laws around Matthew Shepard being killed, and nobody was held accountable for it. He became the poster boy of the gay rights movement, and he was a drug addict, and he was a drug dealer. It had nothing to do with him being gay. But again, this is the information war. It's okay to lie to the enemy. As long as I'm galvanizing my side of the argument, I can lie to the enemy. It doesn't end there. You probably grew up with the term robber barons. You heard about Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and Henry Ford and Charles Schwab and the Mellon family and the Vanderbilts and all these people who allegedly robbed the poor people blind during the Industrial Revolution, especially during the Depression. And these guys were using unscrupulous tactics. They were working their workers to death and all this stuff. Obviously, the purpose of this was to create a prejudice against the rich, to engage in an information war against the rich, so that now the people who are rich in our society, they constantly face that robber baron label. We see it today with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And this is not to say that these guys are perfect. I'm not saying any of these people are perfect. A lot of these folks are clearly anti-union. Some of these people did do things that were unscrupulous, but they were no different than other people who cut corners. The point of the propaganda is to use class distinctions to engage in an information war against the rich and the wealthy. They were demonized in the media, despite the fact that these people are responsible for feeding hundreds of millions of people all across the globe. Some of them are very prolific humanitarians who built hospitals, who funded the colleges and the universities, who built libraries, they had done such tremendous things, pay for museums, and yet they're not the people we're naming streets after. You know, the only way that a guy like John D. Rockefeller or J.P. Morgan gets his name on a building of any kind is if his money paid for it. But these people actually built the United States. We keep saying how the slaves built the United States. Like, no, America was built with the industrialization of the early 1900s. But that's, again, it's an information war. They're lying to you. Slaves were living in an agrarian society. How could they build anything? How did the slaves build the stock market? Most of them couldn't even read. So how could it be possible? You know, did they help build the railroads? Sure. Did they help build ships? Absolutely. But a lot of the America's fast forward movement came way after slavery was abolished in the United States. But what happens is you get this sort of Robin Hood politics. If a guy engages in entrepreneurship and business and he becomes successful, he's evil. Even to some degree, there's Christians who will say that, you know, having tons of money is evil because, you know, Jesus said it would be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, you know? But they miss the entire point of that parable. The point of that parable is for you to not make an idol of being wealthy, for you to not respect rewards in the material world, but in the hereafter. The point of it is that your wealth will not save you. That's the point. When you actually read a little bit more of the Bible, you'll find that God expects you to be fruitful and multiply. That just doesn't mean to have children. That also is supposed to be coupled with the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents tells you, as Jesus discusses, that, you know, one who is given 5 talents comes back with 5 more. One who gives 2 talents or 3 talents comes back with 3 more. One who gets 1 talent, they take it and bury it. And they're told that they're slothful. And that for those who have much, they will be given more, and they will be in abundance. In other words, you're supposed to work to be fruitful and to multiply based off the talents that you are given. And then, once you're given, you are then expected to give it away. But first you have to actually accrue these things, correct? So it's not just the difficulty of a rich man going to heaven. It is also what is expected of the poor. What is expected of those who have the ability to do things and yet they choose not to. But I'm getting off the subject. But that is another one of those lies by omission. They'll tell you that Christianity is against people gaining wealth. It's not true. It's against you making an idolater of wealth. You're not supposed to worship money. That's the point of Jesus telling them to give it away. To see if you truly have faith and if you truly want to do what he asked you to do. But it wasn't a sin to accrue it in the first place. So when you take that lesson into account and you look at these guys who built museums and hospitals and libraries and funded universities, they gave away as much money as they could and they left plenty to their families who did more of the same, giving money away. These people should be looked at a lot more favorably in our society than they do. And even when you look at how we treat our millionaires and billionaires today, how people treat Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are they perfect guys? Absolutely not. But they don't need to be. Elon Musk feeds hundreds of people. His services help hundreds of other more people make their lives a lot more tolerable. I mean, Amazon, for God's sake, it became as successful as it is because everybody uses it. Even the poor can use Amazon. Even the poor can use Instacart and DoorDash and Uber and Lyft. And we hate these people for making our lives more convenient? Well, that's because you fell for the information war. You fell for the disinformation that you were being robbed somehow. That these people were trying to destroy your life. They're trying to destroy society. They're just rich and greedy. But to ask a question that Thomas Sowell asked one point in time, why is it, or was it Milton Friedman? It was one of the other. He asked the question, why is it greedy to keep more of what you earned, but not greedy to demand more of what you didn't earn and what you choose to take from somebody else? For all of you non-believers out there, let's quote some Jay-Z. He said, you can't help the poor if you're one of them. So you make millions and you give back. That's the win-win. But here's the disinformation campaign in action again. Men who did wonderful things for our society are treated like villains for being less than perfect, when we're all less than perfect. You know, some of us are worse than others, obviously. But the reason why you had all of this stuff, the robber baron myth, all of these various myths that I've discussed, a lot of it has to do with academia. With the ability to lie in mass media with no accountability. This has become a huge problem in recent years, that you can publish a book with no peer review. Again, the peer review process was created in the universities, so as a self-check by academics. So if you thought yourself a doctorate of statistics or whatever, and you put out a paper, other people who have doctorates in statistics will be able to check your information to see if it's correct and add it to the canon of statistics. That's how we decided that this is what you've done is good. But then they came up with writing books, which does not require peer review, which means you can put anything in there. And our society has become to venerate books, which is fine, because, you know, reading is a good thing. Being literate is great. The issue comes when you put lies in the books, and then those lies become standardized in our society. Good example, really good example, the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. Young lady decides she's going to write a book that is a collection of essays about how the real founding of the United States should be around the 1619 landing of slaves on this continent. Obviously, this is false. You know, it's actually more to it than that. There's a question about whether those people who came here were even slaves. They might have been indentured servants. They might have even been black Christians from Britain. So they might not have been slaves at all due to the fact that English common law does not allow slaves, Christian slaves, to be held. Like you couldn't hold two people as slaves. That was also a thing here in the colonies when they originally colonized this area in places like Virginia and I believe Georgia. You could not hold Christians enslaved. So that might have been it. We don't know. Was that the debate? No. The debate was, this is the new founding of the United States. And the country was built on white supremacy. And she made millions of dollars. The 1619 Project was standardized across our public schools. And then she vanished into thin air. There was no accountability. Everybody who disagreed with her was called a racist. Most of them didn't even get to their books written and published to counter what she said before she made millions of dollars and then vanished. That is a big part of our issue here is we have common spaces. The internet is a common space. Television is a common space. Everybody has access to it. When you can defile our common spaces, no different than you dumping toxic waste in our nearest river. When you can go on television and dump obviously biased propaganda into our information source and make our information source something that we don't even trust anymore, then you caused a great rift in our society. You have divided our society. There has been countless books that is along the same line as the 1619 Project. I dare not even attempt to name them all. But some of the most important ones were A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which is telling the history of the United States from the perspective of, let's say, Native Americans or blacks or Hispanics or the Chinese or whatever. In order to continue the narrative that America was built on the belief of white supremacy. Howard Zinn, his books have been pushed on pretty much every high school student and college student for decades. People don't really realize it until they're much older that Howard Zinn is propaganda. A book like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander was one of the key books in the bail reform, criminal justice reform issues that started taking place in the 2010s. By arguing that the system is set up to throw black men in prison, and of course their behaviors have nothing to do with this, it's all the system, then it's not their fault. It's not the black man's behavior that is the reason he's continuously getting into fights and arguments with the police and why he's constantly being arrested. It's not because he's out there dealing drugs. It's not because he's shooting at people or robbing people or stealing from the stores. No, it's because the system is set up against him. So you started having these politicians, most notably district attorneys, who are running on, we're going to give people a chance. They created all of these programs. One of them was cashless bail up in New York and a bunch of other places, where now if you get arrested, the state can no longer ask you to post bail to ensure that you're going to show up to your court date. It is purely an honor system, but it's based on lies. It's based on the lie that the system itself is villainizing these people rather than it is the behaviors of antisocial individuals that lead them to being in jail in the first place. So of course, once you let these people who are already antisocial walk right back out of jail, what are they going to do? They're going to skip their court date and they're probably going to go out there and engage in more crime. And this is how you get people who have been arrested for multiple felonies getting let go, put back out on the street because of books like The New Jim Crow or Slavery by Any Other Name. I forget who, the Douglas something, I forget what the writer's name is. But books like that are the reason why we have this criminal justice reform movement. And the criminal justice reform movement is the reason why we have so many homeless people who are violent in our streets. Like in Chicago, that violent dude who was, I think called him the serial puncher, who was punching women in the face at the bus stop. You got All of these situations where homeless people are attacking folks on the subways and the subway stations of New York. They've been arrested dozens of times, but the state doesn't hold them because, well, it's wrong to hold somebody in jail just because they're poor, despite the fact that their behavior is antisocial. They cannot be trusted with freedom. And so there's a lot of artificially inflated criminal cases. People who would not have been victimized at all if the state had done its job and held dangerous criminals in jail, waiting a trial, then they might not have been attacked at all. But these sorts of lies get into our ecosystem and begin to change hearts and minds to the point where the system no longer works and people lose faith in it. And that's really the point, because that's the political goal, is to get you to not have any faith in the system, not have any faith in genuine justice, to not have any faith in the courts, or have any faith in the politicians, have any faith in the media, because the more you're bewildered as part of the bewildered herd, the more you become detached from society. And if they can detach you from society, they can reach out and create a whole new bond. And that new bond is going to be based off of the lie. And ultimately, that's the goal. There's a book. It's called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. And in that book, he tries to explain why individuals join mass movements. And it's not about any particular mass movement. It's about mass movements in general. And in the book, he says essentially that as human beings, we always attribute our success or failure to the state of things around us. In other words, people tend to believe if they fail because of their environment. If they succeed, then they succeeded because of their environment. So they'll say, hey, it could only happen in America, which was one of the favorite Don King lines, because he came very successful in the United States. But for people who are at the bottom, they're constantly told, well, you're a product of your environment. Your failure isn't your fault, it's your environment. But the most important elements that the book teaches you is why individuals join mass movements in the first place. How do they get trapped up in these things? And obviously, the cornerstone of this is discontent. But he said discontent alone is not the problem. You also need an element of power, because when you're discontented and you try to gain power, or you're searching for power, then you have a desire for change. And this when you become a sort of a revolutionary spirit. And he says that these people who have revolutionary spirits, they're looking for substitutes. So they're looking for a substitute for the system that currently exists. So when you criticize the current system, you're offering a problem, and then someone's going to bring you a solution. That solution is a substitute. It's a new system. You complain about capitalism. Somebody brings socialism to you. Hey, you hate capitalism? Here, try this. Listen to this. What about white supremacy? Try this Afrocentrism. Try something different that's going to open your mind up to something much larger. And what it says is, he says that followers are often doped up on hope, but they're actually cheating you out of enjoyment of the present. He's going to talk about that a little bit later, but he says what kinds of people ends up joining these organizations that come from the bewildered herd that Noam Chomsky is talking about. And he has this list of 12 people who are, he says, the discarded and the rejected. One would be the poor. 2 would be misfits, which he defines as people who are somewhat defective or they lack talent. 3, outcasts. 4 are minorities. 5 are the adolescents. 6 are the ambitious. 7 are the obsessives, those who are consumed with their own vices. Number 9 are the impotent. The number 10 are the selfish. Number 11 are the bored. And number 12 are the sinners. The sinners are obviously just criminals. And he says that when mass movements are forming, they hunt for these individuals who are detached from the system for some reason. And they try to group them together to create a new collective identity. And when you create this collective identity, you shed your individual identity. And you no longer see a purpose, or you no longer see a worth or a destiny in yourself apart from your collective. You become almost completely absorbed in the collective. This is what feminism, the LGBT, the gay movements, sometimes with MAGA and America First, all of this sort of stuff, the Islamism, all that sort of stuff means that what happens to you happens to us all. What happened to somebody over here has happened to us all. You internalize even things that didn't happen to you, and it becomes part of your identity. It's an assault on you. And psychologically, this can be very helpful because you never feel alone. And you feel stronger as you're part of a collective. But it's a bad thing because you're only strong as part of a collective. But this is, I think, one of the more important parts of the book is he talks about the stages of revolution, of the mass movements. And you can see this, and maybe I'll talk about this a little bit more. He's called it the depreciation of the present. And what he says is, in mass movements, once the bewildered herd have been propagandized, and they're starting to listen to this politician or this activist or this advocate who is talking about their specific collective identity, what they do is they say, hey, today was better than the past. The past was terrible for us. So when you hear something like MAGA and you're like, make America great again, what are you talking about? We black. We were slaves. We were destroyed by the Night Riders. And what about the Tulsa Race Massacre? Today is much better, right? There's no Tulsa Race massacres today. They teach you to hate the past. But at the same time, they are making the present miserable. They make you miserable. They make you mad. They limit your opportunities. Because the point of attacking the past is to kill it, to get rid of it. And what they eventually do is they push you towards the future. So they make even today, which also becomes pushed onto the ledge with the past. To give you a good example, Black America would constantly talk about the past. They perpetually live in the past. And today is always better. But then in a few years, then today was the past, right? So you'll see Black people talk about, sometimes you'll even see it sometimes with white people. They'll say, man, we didn't have a lot of these race problems in the 90s. Like, I don't remember having a whole lot of race problems in the 90s. And then you'll have Black people say, oh, it was a little bit more insidious then. It was under the surface. You still had your Rodney King riots. And what about Hurricane Katrina? That was 20 years ago. There's always going to be racism. There's, nothing has ever changed, because in order for the mass movement to continue, it has to keep tossing more logs on the fire. And the people who do this are they're called fanatics, And Eric Hoffer defines the fanatics as people who are incomplete, they're insecure, and they cannot be individually self-assured. They cling to the movement. And there's no appealing to reason or morality because the movement is eternal. They're so dedicated to the movement. They're so dedicated to their collective identity that they are loyal only to the collective identity, not to any individual person. And this is why these people turn on each other so quickly, because nothing matters more than the movement. Nothing matters more than whatever the idea that we have collectively brought together. And so when we all decide that the devil exists, because you can unify without God, but you can't unify without a devil. You need an enemy. And this is what Noam Chomsky was talking about when he talked about manufacturing consent. Eric Hoffer says that it's a unifying metric, this hatred. And that when you have to create a devil. And the devil, if it's singular, then your devil is omnipotent and omnipresent, meaning your devil is everywhere all the time. And you look at these mass movements, feminism, everything is the patriarchy. It doesn't matter what it is. If a woman is disaffected in some way, individually or as a group, it's the patriarchy. Even if she did it to herself, it's the patriarchy. You see it with white supremacy. No matter what happens to a black person, even if he did it to himself, it's white supremacy. He could go out there, pick up a gun, shoot somebody, get arrested. Oh my God, the white supremacist police arrested me for shooting a guy. You did it to yourself, but that's not how they think. They look at things from the devil is everywhere, in action, all the time. It's a religious, fundamentalist presentation of a political issue. And it's these fanatics who end up gaining tons of power within these movements because they're the true believers in the movement. They have internalized their collective identity. They've named the devil. They've shamed the devil. They tried to confront that devil. But mostly what they do very effectively is they proselytize. And Eric Hoffer talks about strengthening your faith through proselytizing. Basically, you go out there and you talk about what you truly believe, which is the movement, and you convert other people. That helps you bring your confidence. And once your confidence starts to build, you become truly useful to the movement. So when you ask yourself, how do we end up with guys like Andrew Tate, and we end up with guys like Nick Fuentes? All right, so these guys are the leaders of mass movements. And you look at what they needed to do. They pointed out a devil, feminism, Israel. Everything ties into this somehow. And then from there, you put pressure on your disaffected, which is whatever these people are for. The Nick Fuentes types is going to be the disaffected white males who have been poor and put upon their entire lives. They've been searching for jobs and locked out of jobs. They've been middle class boys who have probably been picked on in school, been forced, been humiliated in these classrooms, told that they were patriarchs and all this other stuff, that they were privileged even when they were poor themselves. You know, they're victims of society's affirmative action laws and all this sort of stuff. And for the Andrew Tate types, you're meeting guys who have been slapped with like sexual harassment for talking to a girl at the workplace, or trying to talk to some girl in a gym, or some guys who have trouble getting women, and they start following these guys because, and this is what's going to screw some people's heads up, to a degree, these are the only guys telling them the truth. Because there is a kernel of truth in both what Nick Fuentes says and what Andrew Tate says. And if the only sources of information that you have ever had in your life are toxic, lying individuals from these lying books, from this lying media, from these lying academics, these lying podcasters, these lying ass YouTubers, and then this guy shows up and tells you one thing that might be true. He might couch it in a bunch of lies himself, but he'll tell you one thing that's true. And he may harp on that one thing. Who are you going to believe? The person who told you the truth and identifies with you, or the person who lied to you? And most of the time, they're saying things that are going to villainize you. I mean, it's easy to see why Nick Fuentes exists. All you gotta do is listen to the media. When Don Lemon can go on television and talk about how white men are a national security threat, what the hell is he saying? Why is he allowed to say that on television? That just does nothing but push these boys more and more into the Nick Fuentes camp. The more people spend money on Israel, the more Nick Fuentes talks about Israel, the more people are like, hey, Nick Fuentes is on the ball. He knows what he's saying. He can say a bunch of other shit they don't agree with, but as long as he's saying enough things that they agree with, they will galvanize around him. And now he's got his own mass movie that call themselves the Groypers. They're following him around. They're repeating everything that he says. They jump into comment sections arguing on his behalf. He literally had them take an oath to rape, kill, and die for Nicholas J. Fuentes. And people are not, I'm not surprised by this at all. It's virtually a fucking cult. Why? Because he's speaking to a generation of people who have been lied to for decades. They've been lied to and they've been lied on for decades. And there is a general sense of enough is enough. We're tired of this. If we have to infiltrate the Republican Party, if we have to infiltrate MAGA and turn it to our own whims, we will. Because enough is enough. The populace has been poisoned. And this is what the media is. The media are social media as well as television, as well as cable, as well as the streaming services or whatever. This is media. This is our common space. It's like if we all went to the river to wash and drink and all this sort of stuff, and then somebody just stands up and starts pissing in it. Okay, that's a problem. All right, we're all using this river, and you're dumping your toxic garbage in this river. You're pissing in it. We can't have that. And that's the same thing that happens when we see people go on television and get platformed while lying and trying to manipulate people, and nobody pushes back. And in fact, they might even walk away with a new book deal. They might walk away and end up with a whole new movie. You might have Hollywood dump $50 million on them to make a movie or something. When people see commercials during the Super Bowl that pushes negative things onto men or Jesus or the family or fatherhood or whatever, that radicalizes folks. It pushes them far away from bonding with society, and it pushes them into these cubby holes where people like Nick Fuentes, who was a charismatic leader, can put the right words together and get your kid wrapped up in his program. Where somebody like Andrew Tate can do the same thing. Now, before Andrew Tate, there was, movements like MGTOW, where there was constantly stories of men being destroyed in divorces. They used to call it divorce raping. No matter what the man's income level, no matter how good of a father he was constantly being reamed in alimony and child support. And if you didn't pay it, you go to jail. And you'd be inundated with these stories again and again and again. And there was a constant stream of them because it was happening perpetually. And it seemed like nobody cared about men. Nobody cares about men's rights or what men think. And eventually, somebody came from the ether with that message, but also had a little bit more money, had some flash, tried to teach guys how to be confident and to get girls. Was it a scam? Probably so. But you created this disaffected male population through social media, movies, and television. And these guys see in Andrew Tate a man that's not willing to take it anymore, that's going to stand up and fight for them. Or at least give them the weapons that they can fight for themselves. Knowledge and information. Rollo Tomasi is another one. And you can argue these guys are misogynists. You can argue that Nick Fuentes is a Nazi. None of that is relevant. Because you've called people misogynists and Nazis for less. You've lied on people for decades. You've told people that guys who are black are Nazis. You call Larry Elder a white supremacist. They're not listening to you anymore. You have destroyed what that word means. You've engaged in war tactics when the other side didn't even know they were in a war. When these, and I'm thinking specifically of young white boys, they were just growing up. They had no idea that feminism was, the feminists were saying things like abort your sons. They had no idea when they were 6 or 7 that people were saying this stuff. When they were 16, 17, they're hearing it in the classroom. Now here they're 27, 28. They're like, wait a minute, this has been 10 years of Gamergate, me being blamed for everything on earth. Fuck that. Why do I have to sit here and listen to this? Good question. Why does he? And it was the same exact stuff when you had black boys. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't know that Zora Neale Hurston had written books where all of the black male characters in the books were terrible woman beaters and cheaters and all this sort of stuff. I didn't get it when I was young and Waiting to Exhale movies and stuff was going on. I was born into the feminist hatred of young men. I didn't know that stuff was even happening. And then people, as I got older, I started to see it. And then I started saying to myself, my God, they say they're calling people bullet bags. This was during Black Lives Matter. You were being called bullet bags. The white people are talking about how you're a criminal and a gangbanger. Nick Fuentes says that all black people should go to jail. Some black woman said that all black men should be born in jail and should have to work their way out. And what the hell? I didn't do any of this stuff. Now, if I was a collectivist, if my self-esteem had been tied into that, then I absolutely would have fallen in with somebody like a Dr. Umar. Because he's the only one, him and other people like him, who are talking about how the black man is a king. The black man is a god. The white man is the devil. He's the one screwing your life up. He's the one that got your woman talking like this. He's pushing family. He's trying to start a school. I mean, my goodness. Who cares more about the black community? The black feminists who are constantly trying to cut the men out of, the program, or Dr. Umar who thinks that the men should be at the center of the program. Who, if I was a collectivist and a black male, who would I listen to? And that's how people end up in these situations. That's how they end up in these movements. They've been propagandized. They were born during the information war. Decades and decades of lies, not misinformation, disinformation. The purpose of which is to demoralize you, isolate you, and destroy you, and then to force you into an enemy camp, and then say you were an enemy all along. That's the insane thing. So many people, specifically, I'm thinking of the extreme black stuff and the extreme white stuff. So many people who would get along perfectly fine if they did not see so much extremism. They wouldn't end up being groypers, or they wouldn't end up being, these crazy woke black radicals. But they see so much of the extremes that they feel that the only defense that they could possibly have in this upcoming war, it's a race war, or upcoming gender war, is to fall into their corner with whatever leader that they've decided, whether it's a Fuentes or a Dr. Umar or a Andrew Tate. I'm just using those three guys as an example. And we're going to fight on this. And like they said in The Wire, if it's a lie, we fight on the lie. And I say the only thing that can really help people is the truth. You got to start telling the truth. And if we told the truth, that would disarm these devils. If you don't like Nick Fuentes, take what Nick Fuentes says that is true and disarm him with the truth. Take his truth, his kernel of truth, take it away from him and put that back into our common space. That has to be something that we can talk about. Whatever Andrew Tate says that is true, we need to take that from him and put it into our common space so that we can all talk about it. That's how you inoculate your children from being put into these extreme situations. Kids go into these extremes because this is the first time they're hearing these things. The first time they hear that they're not the problem, that the Jews are the problem. They're not the problem, it's the women. It's not the problem, it's the white people. The first time they're hearing that is from these people in the extremes. Instead of having this conversation about, hey, there's people out there who think the white man is the devil. Not necessarily the case. Some white people are bad, but not all of them. Same thing for women. Same thing for Jews. Same thing for Arabs. Same thing for Muslims and the Chinese and the Japanese. Instead of having those conversations in public, where we can discuss these things and people can feel like comfortable expressing prejudices and biases, which we all have as human beings. As a human being, you're going to have and preferences. You're going to prefer to do business or live with or marry certain people over others. That doesn't mean that you hate people that you're choosing not to associate with, but you may feel more comfortable associating with certain people over others. But the bottom line of all of this is this. We are all, to a degree, a victim of a disinformation campaign against who we are as an individual. And it is an intersectional thing. If you're not being offended as a man, you're being offended as a black man. If you're not being offended as a woman, you're being offended as a black woman. Then it's the same thing with gays and Jews and all that stuff. And a lot of it is intentional lying by grifters and people who don't mean you any well, and people who want to recruit you for their personal wars against other groups or whatever. But we're all American citizens. And I say to you, read the Bible, Ephesians 4:25, when Paul says that you should shake away falsehoods and speak truthfully to your neighbors as you are all one in the body of Christ. This also applies to your neighborhood. It applies to your household. It applies to your school. It applies to social media. It applies everywhere. If you are in a classroom, you are a member of that body. You are one of the members of that body. You should be called to tell the truth. No matter how many lies is bouncing off the walls in those rooms, you should be the one to stand up and tell the truth. It is your responsibility to help other people around you by spreading the good word of the truth, not just of the gospel, but of the truth about these political situations and these social concerns that we have. It's the only chance we're going to have in order to pull the nose up on how bad our politics has gotten. Thank you guys for your time. I'm going to talk to you guys later.